house to yours. Welcome to EMS at Sea Level. Today's guest is Arthur Tan. Arthur is the CEO of IMI. Before we get into the questions, Arthur, can you give me a quick introduction to yourself and, of course, to IMI?
Quick introduction about myself. I'm actually based here in Manila. IMI is a global EMS company. I think as of last year, we're ranked 17th globally, and I think we're the 5th largest in terms of automotive electronics as EMS is concerned. I'm an engineer by training. I graduated electronics and communications engineer actually here in the Philippines, and then had the pleasure of actually working in the United States for a good number of years for a company called American Microsystems Incorporated as an ASIC engineer and doing everything from design, test, product, all the way to eventually getting myself promoted to the level of incompetence, as they say. So I ended up becoming director. And so as life would have it, you know, you go into full circle. And what happened was one of the projects that I was given was to come back to Asia and run Asia Pacific, including Japan, and at that time emerging China for AMI. And during that period, after my assignment, I decided to join the Ayala Group, who was then one of the pioneers here in the Philippines in terms of electronic manufacturing, and was able to join that company in 2001. So fast forward, it's been a run. It's about 19 years now I've been running the company, and so it's quite a journey.
Yeah, and it's quite a different company to the one that you took over 19 years ago. It's kind of grown in leaps and bounds, and it's moved in specific directions. It's been quite a story, I guess, and quite a roller coaster ride for you.
It has. I mean, we look back the last 19 years, definitely there have been multiple cycles in the economy and the global market that has happened. And the one that I would say over the course of my entire career is that the cycle seems to be much more closer in terms of space. You know, if we look back, we now are undergoing the trade war was just last year. This year we're having the pandemic, and then prior to that was the financial market downturn now in 2009. So it's becoming quite more volatile.
It'd be nice to catch a break, wouldn't it? It'd be nice to have a few quiet years. So let's start with the whole pandemic thing. Talk me through the kind of timing as the wave of the virus went through your different manufacturing geographies.
Well, we actually, you know, we're situated in the major markets. So we have operations in China. We have 5 factories in China, and China was the first one, as we all knew. You know? And when that happened, and they went into a complete lockdown, that actually affected not just my company, but everybody, including the supply chain on a global basis. And it's a unique thing because we at that point we were dealing with something that was unknown, and the last time we had a pandemic was 1918, and so from a reactionary perspective, everybody who had the experience to deal with a pandemic was already gone, and so everybody is a first timer in this case. And I have to say that, you know, China dealt with it aggressively, and as they always do, and they had the means to be able to do it. And I think from perspective, you know, looking back, I think that they did the right thing at the right time. And so we can see now the effects of that, because as we move into the other countries that are being affected, including the Philippines, and the way it's being managed and being affected from a medical issue to now an economic issue, we can see that China is the one that's actually coming out at least a little bit better than the others.
Yeah, and ahead.
So
yeah, no,
it's propagating through Europe, to the United States, and here in the rest of Asia.
Yeah, and it feels like that there are, some geographies that don't really have a strong grasp, and the concerns that particularly in Central and South America are very great. So we're not post-pandemic at the moment, that's for sure. When you look at the issues with respect to not just supply but also demand, obviously you and some of your customers have a role to play in actually combating the pandemic itself. How were you involved in that, and how were you able to support your customers that were looking to provide solutions that could help?
Well, from that perspective, we know that the medical requirements. So if we look at the total medical industry, the medical industry also shrunk. So in spite of this pandemic, there's only a certain sector inside the medical community that actually is thriving. And part of that is because of the requirement for PPEs and the manufacturing for that. And so the way that our company has been involved in that sector is that we are part of that essentials in terms of being able to produce the electronic control systems necessary in order to continue to build and operate these equipments that produce the required PPEs for the world, especially the United States. And so that's our direct connection into that part. Now, on top of that, all the manufacturing companies look at themselves and figure out that, if you are operating in a certain country, we find out that having access to the critical medical equipment becomes challenging, because each of the country that are actually producing it want to keep it for themselves before they share it with anybody else.
That's right.
And we saw this issue rise significantly, 3M being an example of being placed in the middle of that, right? Yeah. And so from our perspective, since we have that ability to produce, design, and work in different geographies, our division, STI in the UK, became part of this ventilator challenge. And so we were now producing the 15,000 full ventilators, Penland ventilators, that is necessary, that the NIH is looking for. And then from the Philippines side, we also took in the cudgel for developing our own equipment that we can do. So the full ventilator system is such a critical, but it's also not as required, because we saw that the numbers here in the Philippines, even though the confirmed cases are rising, the number of actual requirement for intubation in ICU is actually not that high. Yeah. And so we went and developed the joint program between University College of London, UCL, and JADIS AMG for their Ventura CPAP design. And that's the one that we're manufacturing locally here in the Philippines.
Okay, and that's going into it's going into hospitals there.
Yeah, that's the idea. Then we will have a lot more intervention before they become critical and need fully intubated ventilators.
Yeah. Okay. Very, very good. And when we look at the process as we move forward, there's a lot of sentiment with respect to reshoring, with respect to supply chain dependence. Is a global supply chain the solution? Is a regional supply chain the solution? And how does the Philippines fit in within that big picture? Is the Philippines a good, strong alternative to China?
Well, I wouldn't call it an alternative. Hold on. Let me just see. I wouldn't call it as an alternative. I think what we're seeing now is that there is no longer a single dependence for a single location anywhere in the world, including China. Yeah. And so what we've viewed it is that we've always had an Asian strategy, and it's always a China plus strategy. Yeah. Just so happened that our plus strategy decided it'll be the Philippines instead of Vietnam or instead of Indonesia. And the other EMS companies also go through that process, and they also have the same strategy. Now, what we've been doing over the last decade is that we believe more towards a regional type of manufacturing than the centralized global manufacturing. So yes, we are involved in large operations in different markets and in different countries, but we are more involved in making sure that we're able to deliver the goods and services that our customers want within a regional context, and therefore manage a global supply chain, but be able to deliver the goods and services at the regional level that is much more adaptive and able to then deliver in a shorter amount of time the needs of our customers within that regional market.
Yeah, yeah. So that gives you a bit more agility, a bit more adaptability, and when there's another crisis, it gives you a little bit more resilience, I think, by having that redundancy.
I think everybody. You're right, and I think everybody has woken up to that phenomenon, given the different scenarios that has happened over the last couple of years.
Yeah, and are you hearing that from the OEMs that you talk to, from your customers? Are they saying, "Hey, great job in helping us through this crisis, but as we look to the future and we look to design the supply chain that's going to be ready for the next crisis, we need this, this, and this"? Or are you going to them and saying, "Hey, this is what you should be doing"? How's that conversation being started?
Actually, we're a customer-led company ever since, and this discussion of being more regional than just a central global site for us actually emanated from our customers during the early part of the year, during the decade ago. We've had a significant amount of European customer base, of which we supplied out of Asia. And at the end, they told us that, you could be our partner on a global basis, but you have to understand, we have customers in Europe, for Europe. And we have customers in Asia for the rest of the world. Our brand is a global brand, but we do have customers in each of these regions that we need to be competitive to. Yeah. And to be able to have a feature that is actually much more focused on their needs. And so then the one size fit all scenario for their product line does not hold true. And we know this, because even Apple had to transition from a white device with one button to all the colors and all the sizes of the displays and everything now. So no one size fits all works for anybody. Yeah. And our customers saw this already earlier on. And so they came to us and said, "We like you, we want to expand with you, but if you want to be able to take a larger portion of our business model, right, then you will have to be able to serve us in all of these regional markets." And that's the reason why we started moving into a regional play. Yeah, yeah.
And that's why you have that global footprint. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you look at that going forward, you need to be able to transition projects from one facility to the other. You need that resilience. You need that flexibility. What role does digital transformation play in that? How important is it that you're automated, that you have a digital thread, that you have automated purchasing and project management processes? Is that a key factor?
Well, yes, especially for scale, definitely. Mm-hmm. When you're minding one store, you can go to the store every day, you watch how goods are moving, you can go back to the warehouse, check the shelves yourself, and then manage that. The moment that you have scale and now you're operating in different geographies with the different time zones and definitely with a wider breadth of products and services, then there is no other path than really having a single database and digitizing. And we saw this earlier on when IMI was even less than $500 million in sales. I told the team there that there was no way that we will be able to scale if we're going to operate like a mom and pop shop if we want to compete like a Walmart. So the only way to do that was to have a system, to have a structured IT backend that we will be able to move. In fact, I'm very, very proud to say that when we integrated SAP into the Philippines, and we did this under the manufacturing environment for SAP, they told us we were the first one in the country to be able to integrate this system in, I think, 28 currencies.
Wow.
That we had to be able to track all of our inventory down to millicents in 28 currencies, right? So this is the challenge, right?
Yeah.
And that's not cheap. That's also not cheap. But it affords you now the capability of having the ability to access and be able to move much more in a quicker fashion to serve your customers as they change, as the market changes as well.
Yeah. So. Yeah, and you're ready for a disruption, and you can model and you can move stuff. That's absolutely key. When you look at this disruption, one of the key elements has been communication, leadership, keeping your team as one. How have you managed that complex process, and what's it been like?
Well, I mean, this digital format that we're in right now definitely plays a factor because this is the longest I've stayed in my place, in my house. I started to enjoy it again, but and then there are nook and crannies in the house, and some scotch that I didn't even think I had that now I found. So. So in reality, what it does is that we've been operating already in a global environment. My direct reports are all over the place. You know, the global head of my operations for all the factories in a worldwide scale is actually living in Sofia, Bulgaria. So French that lives there. The head of my advanced manufacturing engineering actually lives in Tustin, California. And the head of my CFO is actually based out of Singapore. And so we've always operated under this environment that we have. What we'd like to do is we believe this is culturally. I think we built a level of trust within the organization. That we can function in this type of an environment, knowing full well that everybody will look after themselves. And so time zones and physical presence, although are important, and we make sure that we try to do as much of it as we can, is also not something that is critical for our business.
That's good. That's important, isn't it? And when you look at it from your own point of view, Arthur, you said you found some scotch that you didn't know you had. That's always good news. But you haven't been able to get out to all those great restaurants and go to the theater and stuff. What have you been doing at home? Have you been binging on TV, watching Netflix, watching Amazon Prime?
Yeah. So one of the advantages we have here in the Philippines is that one of our sister company here in the Ayala Group is Globe Telecom. And so they're the largest service provider for wireless internet network here in the country. So I have the privilege as well to use that and be able to binge on Netflix and YouTube and everything. One thing that is great is now including TED, right? So I think I know so much more about intermittent fasting. How apple cider vinegar can change.
There you go. So wellness.
What causes insomnia from and so these things are the ones that I binge on, and of course,
I think those TED Talks are great, and there's some inspirational stuff on there about kind of the future of automation and AI and all that good stuff that reflects in what you do day to day, as well as the very interesting wellness and sustainability stuff. It's definitely worth a look. Last question before we wrap up, Arthur. Any specific advice you give to your peers at the moment? There's a lot of small and large EMS companies where people are pulling their hair out. Same with OEMs. what would your takeaway, your advice be to them?
It's a challenging period for sure. And then depending on where you are in the supply chain and depending on how that particular market of where your product and services are being served, I'm sure are going through different. If you're in the tourism industry, if you're in the hotel retail industry, then definitely it's going to be challenging. But I think one thing that what we should always look up to is that this too shall pass. And we should not lose focus of what is important, right? And a lot of people says, well, what is important? And everybody has to have their own purpose. And so what we have, and this is inculcated in all the Ayala companies, is that we have a purpose that Ayala has been in business for over 185 years. I don't think you have an entity that could last 185 years if it really didn't have a grander purpose in life. And so what we would like to advocate within the group, and what I would advise to everybody, is that just focus on what is important, and then everything will work out, right? And what is important to me, as always, is that I'm sure we have no control how this pandemic is going to play out. But we do have control on how we're going to deal with our people. That we control. Whether we take an aggressive approach, whether we take a passive approach, whether we take an approach where we try to save as many employment as possible, and how we approach that, whether what is more important is the profitability of the company or making sure that everybody then survives out of these things are what I consider will be the important part that we have to focus in. Now, once you've decided that, then the rest of the stuff becomes clear. The rest of the stuff, like we're deciding on how much of our workforce do we really need to be exposed out into this environment, this unknown environment, and be able to operate and support us. So maybe the work from home scenario is really not a bad thing. But if we're going to do that, then let's not set up our people to fail. If you want somebody to be able to operate in a work from home environment, what are the things that you need to make them successful? So this comes into the equipment, the back end structure, how we operate, and so on. So everything else becomes clear as we move down there. And I think there's no one single solution to all of this. I think what we're going to find out is that at the end of the day, there's still, roughly over 7 billion people in the world, and that they will need to consume something, and be able to manage all of these is still going to be based, at least from my perspective, that there's some augmented electronics that's necessary in order to keep us alive, in order to keep us safe, in order to be able to function. And so what we would like to do is just make sure that we're part of that. We're part of the solution rather than the problem. Right?
No, those wise words indeed, Arthur. And I think the focus on what's your key strategy, what are the big things, because as companies you're equipped to turn those strategies into tactics and make it happen on the ground. But you do need to figure out exactly where you're going and what you want and what the end game is. So great advice. Arthur, thanks so much for your time. Thank you for your candor. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. And until next time on EMS at Sea Level, thank you everybody for watching.